Living in our house as a child felt like being in a military camp. My father, Robert, who was a college professor, ran everything with strict discipline. My older sister, Grace, was the perfect child. She followed the rules, focused on her schoolwork, and always wanted to make everyone happy. I was the complete opposite, always pushing the boundary. Mia, sit up straight. My father would snap during dinner. A lady doesn't slouch. I'd roll my eyes, sit up for a moment, and then slouch again the second he wasn't looking. It was a constant power struggle between us. My mother, Karen, didn't say much but was just as strict in her own way. She would give me disapproving looks over my clothes or the friends I chose. What will the neighbors think? She'd always ask, though it seemed like she cared more about appearances than anything else. Despite the stifling atmosphere at home, I found small ways to create my own space. When I was 17, I started secretly dating Adam, who was 20 and in college, exactly the kind of person my parents wouldn't approve of. For a while, I felt like things were finally going my way. I had plans to go to college and escape my parents' grip. But life had other plans for me. A few months after my 19th birthday, I began feeling sick in the mornings. At first, I thought it was stress from my upcoming exams, but the symptoms became too frequent to ignore. I still remember standing in a small gas station bathroom, staring at a pregnancy test with shaky hands. One pink line appeared, positive. I was pregnant. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about what to do. I knew I had to tell Adam, but every time I tried to call him, I lost my nerve. Finally, I couldn't avoid it any longer. We met at our usual spot, a small park away from everyone's eyes. Adam smiled when he saw me, but his smile quickly faded as he noticed the serious look on my face. "Mia, what's wrong?" he asked, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, hugging myself. "I'm pregnant," I blurted out. The silence that followed was heavy. Adam's face went through a series of emotions: shock, disbelief, and finally, fear. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. I took 6 tests. They were all positive. Adam ran his hands through his hair, his eyes suddenly cold. "You need to get rid of it, Mia. An abortion is the only option. We're too young for this. It'll ruin our lives." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The boy I thought I'd loved was telling me to get rid of our baby as if it meant nothing. "Get out of my sight," I hissed, turning away from him. He left without another word, leaving me alone to face the hardest decision of my life. Telling my parents was even harder. I waited until after dinner when my father was in his usual spot in the living room, reading the newspaper, and my mother was knitting. Grace stood nearby, ever the bystander. "I have something to tell you," I said, my voice shaking. My father lowered the newspaper and looked at me suspiciously. "What is it, Maya?" I took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The reaction was worse than I had imagined. My father's face turned beet red as he yelled about shame and disappointment. My mother burst into tears, crying about what the neighbors would think. Grace stood there, shocked and disgusted. "You'll get an abortion," my father finally said, his voice cold. "We'll find a discreet clinic. No one has to know about this mistake." At first, I resisted, but the pressure from my family was suffocating. A few days later, I found myself sitting in a doctor's office. My mother and Grace sat beside me like guards. The doctor, a kind woman in her 50s, looked over my charts and then turned to me, her eyes filled with concern. "Mia," she said gently, "because of your medical history, if you have an abortion, there's a high chance you may never be able to have children again." Her words hit me like a freight train. Never be able to have children again. Suddenly, the choice became clear. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I'm keeping the baby." My mother gasped, and Grace rolled her eyes, but I stood my ground. The drive home was tense, filled with silence. When we walked through the door, my father was waiting for news. "Well?" he demanded. "She wouldn't do it," my mother spat, frustrated. My father's face twisted with anger. He took a deep breath before speaking, his voice cold and final. "Get out. Pack your things and leave. You're no daughter of mine. I won't have you embarrassing this family with your condition." My mother nodded in agreement, her eyes hard. "You heard your father. Go." Grace just stood there, silent and judgmental. Tears streamed down my face as I rushed to my room, grabbed some clothes, and threw them into a bag. As I headed for the door, my father's voice stopped me one last time. "And don't think about coming back. As far as we're concerned, you're dead to us." The door slammed behind me with a sound that felt both final and devastating. I was alone, pregnant, and homeless. In desperation, I called the only person I thought might help, my Aunt Sarah. She and Uncle Mike had always been the outcasts of the family, living in another state and rarely talking to my parents. "Mia, what's wrong, sweetie?" Aunt Sarah's voice was warm and concerned. Through my tears, I explained everything. There was a long pause after I finished. "Where are you now?" she finally asked. "Outside our house. They kicked me out." Another pause. "Stay right there. We're coming to get you." The drive to Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike's house was long, but it gave me time to think. Their house was small but cozy. As soon as we arrived, Aunt Sarah fussed over me, making sure I ate something, while Uncle Mike carried my bag to the spare room, which would now be mine. "It's not much," he said, placing the bag down, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." I looked around the small, warm room and felt a lump in my throat. "It's perfect," I whispered. The next few weeks were filled with doctor's appointments and adjusting to my new life. One evening at dinner, Aunt Sarah spoke up. "We've been thinking," she said. "We wanted to help you continue your education." I looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" Uncle Mike leaned forward. "We've saved some money over the years. We never had kids of our own, so we want to use it to help you go to college." I was speechless. After everything that had happened, the idea of college seemed impossible. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Aunt Sarah smiled. "We believe in you, Mia. This baby doesn't mean the end of your dreams." With their support, I enrolled in a local community college, majoring in business management. It wasn't easy juggling classes, doctor's appointments, and pregnancy, but I was determined. I'd also found a job as a waitress at a local restaurant. The owner, Evelyn, was kind and flexible with my hours. It wasn't much, but it helped me save for the baby and contribute to Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike's household. The day my son was born was the most terrifying and beautiful day of my life. After hours of labor, I held him in my arms, amazed by his tiny fingers and toes. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike stood nearby, smiling like proud grandparents. "What are you going to name him?" Aunt Sarah asked softly. "Lucas," I said. "It means bringer of light, because he brought light into my life." As I adjusted to being a mother, balancing a newborn, college classes, and work, I'd often thought about my parents and Grace. Did they know about Lucas? Did they regret what they had done? But I'd pushed those thoughts aside. I had a new family now, one that accepted and loved me unconditionally. One day, during a rare break, I was scrolling through social media when a post caught my attention. It was from Grace. "Excited to announce that Adam and I are engaged. Can't wait to start our life together." The photo showed Grace smiling, her arm around Adam, the same Adam who had abandoned me and our child. They looked so happy, like nothing had ever happened. A wave of emotions hit me: anger, hurt, betrayal. But then I looked at Lucas playing in his crib and realized something important. I didn't need their approval or their love. Everything I needed was right here. The years flew by in a blur of diapers, textbooks, and late-night study sessions. My last semester was tough. I was taking extra classes to graduate on time, still working at the restaurant, and caring for an energetic 5-year-old. Graduation day was filled with emotions. As I stood in line to receive my diploma, I looked into the crowd and saw Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike beaming with pride. Lucas sat on Uncle Mike's shoulders, waving excitedly whenever he caught my eye. The real surprise came later, at the graduation party Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike threw for me. While we were celebrating, Evelyn, my boss from the restaurant, pulled me aside. "Mia, I have an offer for you," she said with a smile. "I'm looking for a new restaurant manager, and I think you'd be perfect for the job." I was shocked. "Me? But I've only been a waitress." Evelyn waved her hand dismissively. "You've been so much more than that. I've seen how you handle tough customers, how you organize the staff, and how you balance work, school, and motherhood. That's the kind of dedication I need in a manager." It felt like a dream come true, a steady job with better pay and regular hours. It was exactly what Lucas and I needed to start our new life. The next few years were full of positive changes. I threw myself into my new role at the restaurant, learning everything I could about management and business. Lucas started school and grew into a smart, curious boy who loved to read and play baseball. It was at one of Lucas's Little League games that I met Chris. He was there with his son Dylan, who was playing on the other team. We started talking, and I was instantly drawn to his kind eyes and easy laugh. "Single dad?" I asked, noticing he was alone. He nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. "Widower, actually. Dylan's mom passed away when he was a baby. My heart ached for him. I'm so sorry. That must be hard." "It is," he admitted. "But we manage." "How about you? Single mom?" I laughed. "Isn't that obvious?" Our relationship developed slowly. We were both careful, having been hurt before, and with our children in the picture, we didn't rush things. But as months passed, I found myself falling for Chris. He was kind and patient, and Lucas adored him. A year after we met, Chris proposed. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a quiet moment in his backyard with our boys playing nearby. Our wedding was small and intimate, with only close friends and family. As I walked down the aisle with Lucas proudly by my side as the ring bearer, I caught Aunt Sarah's eye. She was crying, but her smile was radiant. Life with Chris, Lucas, and Dylan soon settled into a comfortable rhythm. A couple of years after our wedding, we were blessed with another addition to our family. Our daughter, Lily, was born on a warm spring morning. As I held her in my arms with Chris, Lucas, and Dylan gathered around the hospital bed, I felt a sense of completeness I had never known before. I loved all three of my children equally, Lucas and Lily, my biological children, and Dylan, my stepson. Blood didn't matter. They were all my kids. One evening, Aunt Sarah was over, helping with the kids, when we were startled by a familiar voice coming from the TV. There, larger than life, were my parents. My father stood at a podium, waving to a cheering crowd. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "Robert Andrews announces his candidacy for mayor." My heart nearly stopped. It had been years since I had seen my parents, even if only on a screen. My father looked older, his hair grayer, but his eyes still had that same stern, determined look I remembered so well. As we watched him speak about family values and moral integrity, Aunt Sarah's face twisted with anger. "Hypocrites," she spat, her voice shaking with fury. I turned to her, shocked. "Aunt Sarah." She took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving the screen. "There's something you need to know, Mia, something they've kept hidden for years." "What?" I asked, confused. What she told me next shook me to my core. Many years ago, before Grace and I were born, my parents had their first child, a boy. But he was born with severe physical disabilities, without legs. Instead of loving and caring for him, they left him at the hospital, too afraid he would embarrass them. A whirlwind of emotions swept over me, shock, disbelief, and a deep sadness for the brother I never knew. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice shaky. Aunt Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Mia. I should have. But after what your parents did to you, I didn't want to add to your pain." That night, after the kids were in bed, I made a decision. I needed to find my brother. With Chris's support, we hired a private investigator. Weeks went by, and finally, we had a lead. My brother was alive, and against all odds, he had thrived. He was a successful writer, married with kids of his own. He had been adopted by a wealthy family that had given him every chance to succeed. Meeting him for the first time was surreal. Even though he looked different, I could see parts of myself in his face. His name was Ben, and he greeted me with a warm smile and open arms. "I always knew I had a biological family out there somewhere," he said softly. "I just never thought I'd find a sister." Over the next few months, Ben and I became close. I introduced him to my family, and he welcomed us into his. His wife, Emily, and their 2 children became part of our extended family. 22 years had passed since the day my parents kicked me out. Life had moved on, bringing both joy and sorrow. Lucas was now 20 and had just started college on a baseball scholarship. I couldn't have been prouder of the man he was becoming. One lazy Tuesday afternoon, I was scrolling through news articles when a familiar face caught my eye. It was my father, looking older but still carrying that same air of self-importance. The headline read, "Mayor Robert Andrews discusses family values in an exclusive interview." Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on the video. For a few minutes, I listened as my father talked about the importance of family and moral values. Then the interviewer asked about his children. My father's face softened into what I knew as his public sympathy look. "I have one daughter, Grace. She's the light of our lives. Tragically, we lost 2 of our children. The pain never goes away, but it's made our family stronger." For days, I seethed with quiet rage. How dare they erase me and Ben, pretending to be tragic, sympathetic figures. Almost as if fate was stepping in, Ben called. "Mia, guess what? I'm doing a book signing in our hometown next week. It would mean the world to me if you could come." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I told him, a plan already forming in my mind. The following week, I found myself back in the city where I had grown up. As I walked through the familiar streets, memories came rushing back, some good, but many painful. I pushed them aside, staying focused on what I needed to do. The book signing was being held in the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel. As I entered, I realized Ben hadn't been exaggerating. Half the town seemed to be there. Local celebrities, business leaders, and politicians were all mingling, waiting for the event to start. And there, in the front row, sat my parents and Grace. My father, now the mayor, looked every bit the part of a distinguished politician. My mother, elegantly dressed, smiled and nodded at people she knew. Grace sat beside them. They hadn't noticed me yet. I found a seat near the back, my heart pounding so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. Ben rolled onto the stage in his wheelchair to loud applause. He looked confident and comfortable in the spotlight. As he began talking about his book and his life, I saw my parents nodding, trying to look sympathetic. "I was born with a severe disability," Ben said. "No legs and other health issues. My biological parents abandoned me at the hospital, unable or unwilling to care for me." I watched my father closely, but his expression didn't change. No recognition, no shame, just the practiced look of a politician showing concern for someone else's story. "It's a sad story," Ben continued, "but I was lucky. I was adopted by a wonderful family who gave me every opportunity to succeed. Still, I always wondered about my birth family, who they were and why they gave me up." The room was completely silent, everyone focused on Ben as he spoke. My heart raced, knowing the moment that would change everything was coming. "But that's not the end of my story," Ben said, smiling. "You see, I found my family. My sister, Mia, is here today." He turned toward me, extending his hand. "Mia, would you join me on stage?" A gasp spread through the audience as I stepped into the spotlight. Many faces showed recognition. After all, I had grown up in this town. But the most dramatic reactions were in the front row. My parents' faces went pale, their expressions shifting between shock, fear, and realization. Grace looked like she had seen a ghost. They knew their carefully built image was about to fall apart. My parents stood quickly, clearly planning to make a fast exit. But I wasn't about to let them escape the truth again. "Mom, Dad, please stay," I called out, my voice echoing through the now silent room. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation, don't you?" My parents froze, trapped by the eyes of the entire audience. Slowly, reluctantly, they sat back down. I took a deep breath. "Many of you knew me growing up. You knew my family. But there's a lot you didn't know, a lot that's been hidden for far too long. And then I told them everything, how my parents had abandoned Ben at the hospital because they were ashamed of his physical differences, how they had hidden his existence, building their reputation on lies. And then, I continued, my voice growing stronger, history repeated itself. When I got pregnant at 19, they didn't offer support or understanding. They demanded I have an abortion, even though doctors warned it could leave me infertile. When I refused, they kicked me out, pregnant, alone, and abandoned, all to protect their perfect image. Gasps and whispers spread through the crowd. I saw people's disgusted looks aimed at my parents, who seemed to shrink in their seats. For years, I've heard them talk about family values and morality. I said, my voice full of emotion. But their actions tell a different story. They abandoned 2 of their children when we needed them the most. They erased us from their lives to keep up their perfect image. The room erupted into chaos. People were shouting, some at my parents, others at each other. Journalists who had come for a simple book signing were now furiously taking notes or speaking into their phones. In the middle of the uproar, I low CKDIES with my father, the man who had one CCCE so powerful in my childhood. Now of it look heat small, and DFEATD. My mother was openly crying, and Gracie said gate frozen. Her face filled with show CK and confusion. In the days that followed, the story blew up. It was all over the local news, then the national news. My father's political career crumbled overnight. The man who had preached about integrity and family values was exposed as a KMHOCR. Let us suppose a shine as mayor became impossible to hold, and YTN of the he resigned citing personnel reasons. But EVE1 knew the truth. The college where he had told you quickly GISTANCET themselves, firing him amidst the SCANDL. One thing became clear. Grace made her choice. She stood fire and lied by our parents, refusing to face the truth. During a brief phone call, she hissed, "UOUV ruined EVERIK. Don't contact me again. You're dead to me, just like you were dead to mom and dad." But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. A few days later, I got a call from a number I HKDNT seen in OVV 22 years. It was Adam, Gracie's FIANCA, and the father of my eldest son. "MIA?" he said, his voice hesitant and almost shy. "I've been thinking about us. About what? AAPPNED. Grace and I. We can hate children. And I thought well, we have AASFON together. Maybe we could be a family. I COULDNT help but lave UG. Adam, you made your choice 22 years ago. You lived to me when I was pregnant with your child. You married my sister. And now, just because you can't see a child you are in with her, you think you can come back to me? No, that's not how it works. But am I a? No, Adam. I have a wonderful US band and a beautiful family. I don't need you, and I certainly don't and to you. Goodbye. I hung up, feeling a sense of CLOSUR I didn't know I needed. But the surprises didn't stop there. The next day, I got another unexpected call. This time from Adam's parents. "MIA? A 10-T-A-T-E voice asked. This is Linda, Adam's mother. We just found out about Lucas. Is it true? Do we have a grandson? The skill and realization that FLLBD was emotional and eye-opening. Adam and my parents had told them I'd had an abortion and run away. They spent years believing their grandchild never existed. Did we like to meet him? Linda said, her voice trembling. If that's okay with you. Of course, we indeed understand if you don't even us in your lives. I thought you had for a moment. Adam's parents wearing responsibility for what ADM did or for the lies my parents told. They had BENDCE too. Okay, I said, fine, I'll lie. I'll tell Kate to Lucas and see if he's open to meeting you. The meeting between Lucas and his grandparents went surprisingly well. There were tears, huges, and lots of catching up. Lucas, always kind-hearted, knew so many to them with open arms. In the months that followed, life settled into a new normal. BDN and his family became a regular part of our lives, filling our home with laughter and love. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike doted on all the grandchildren, biological or not. As for my parents and Grace, I only heard Baptiste and PCEs about them. They had moved away, trying to escape the scandal. Part of me felt sorry for them, but I knew I had done the right thing by telling the truth. Life with Cypress, Lucas, Dylan, and our new daughter, Lily, became everything I had hoped for. Our home was filled with love, and despite the challenges, we found joy in these small moments. Family dinners, cheering on the boys at their baseball games, and the laughter of our children. One evening, after the kites were in BD, I sat with CHRS on our porch, watching the stars. Do you ever think about them? He asked gently. My parents. I nodded, staring into the night. Sometimes, it's strange. After everything TAEYV done, part of me still wonders if they reject it. But I think IV find a line peace. With the FHC that they may never see HNG. I don't need their APGAR Oval anymore. I have everything I could ever want right here. Keisharis squeezed my hand, and I knew he understood. It wasn't that I forgave them entirely. It was more that I no longer needed their validation. I had created a life for myself, a family filled with love and acceptance, and that was more than enough. A few months after the SCA broke, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. MIA, it's Grace, came the voice on the other end. I hadn't heard from her since the FALUT. My heart skipped peak at BET. UNCURE of FWK88AKKC. Grace, I said cautiously, what do you want? There was a long pause, and I could hear her breath shaking. I need to tell a key to you about Adam. I felt a wave of emotions, but I stayed quiet, letting her speak. He left me, she finally said. her voice cracking. After I stood by him through DSCANDL. He said he didn't handle the pressure anymore. He left. A part of me wanted to gloat, to remind her that Adam had a history of running away when things got tough. But I knew better. Grace was broken, just as I had been all those years ago. "I'm sorry, Grace," I said softly, meaning it. "But Adam's been making those kinds of choices for years. I don't know if he'll ever change." Grace started crying, and for the first time in years, I heard vulnerability in her voice. "I should have listened to you, Mia. I was so caught up in trying to live up to Mom and Dad's expectations that I didn't see what was right in front of me." The conversation was bittersweet. Grace wasn't asking for forgiveness, but in that moment, I realized that I had already forgiven her, if only because holding onto the anger wasn't serving me anymore. It was time to let go. "Take care of yourself, Grace," I said as we ended the call. I didn't know what would come next for her, but I hoped she would find her own path, just as I have found mine. Ben and I grew closer as siblings, and our families often spent holidays and weekends together. It was healing, not just for me, but for my children to see that family could be rebuilt. Ben's children, though younger, got along well with Lucas and Dylan, and Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mike welcomed them into the fold like long-lost grandchildren. One afternoon, as we sat around the dinner table, Ben smiled at me. "I never thought I'd have a real family again, Mia. I spent so many years feeling like an outsider. But thanks to you, I found home." His words struck a chord in me. Family wasn't just about blood. It was about the connections we chose to keep and nurture. Despite everything, we had built something beautiful together. Lucas, my oldest, was growing into a remarkable young man. After meeting Adam's parents, he'd have been curious about his biological father. One evening, after I put the younger kids to bed, he asked to talk. "Mom," Lucas began, "I know you said you don't want Adam in our lives, but do you think I'll ever get to meet him?" His question caught me off guard. I had spent years keeping Adam out of our lives, but now, looking at my son, I realized that this was his choice to make. "I don't know if Adam is ready for that, Lucas," I said gently, "but if you want to reach out to him, I won't stand in your way. Just promise me you'll be careful." Lucas nodded. "I don't expect anything from him, Mom. I just want to know who he is." A few weeks later, Lucas reached out to Adam. The meeting was awkward at first, but Lucas handled it with a maturity that surprised even me. Adam was distant, clearly unsure of how to bridge the gap between the choices he had made and the son he had never known. But Lucas was strong, and after the meeting, he told me, "I'm glad I met him, but he's not the father I need. That's Chris." I hugged him tight, proud of the man he was becoming. Years passed, and though I never sought out my parents, life has a funny way of bringing things full circle. One day, I received a letter in the mail, an old-fashioned, handwritten letter from my father. In it, he didn't apologize directly, but he expressed regret for how things had turned out. "I'm not the man I once thought I was," he wrote. "I see now that the values I held onto so tightly caused more harm than good. I understand if you never want to see us again, but I want you to know that I think of you often." I sat with the letter for a long time, feeling conflicted. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to protect myself from more pain, but another part of me recognized the significance of his words. He would never be the perfect father, but perhaps this was his version of trying. In the end, I chose not to respond. I had forgiven him in my own way, but I didn't need to re-enter that chapter of my life. My parents had made their choices, and I had made mine. My focus was on my family, on Chris, Lucas, Dylan, Lily, and the future we were building together. Life had come full circle in ways I never expected. From the day I left home as a pregnant teenager to the moment I stood beside my brother on stage, exposing the truth to the world, I had grown stronger than I ever thought possible. Family wasn't just about where you came from. It was about who stood by you when it mattered most. I had found my family in Chris, our children, Ben, and Aunt Sarah, and Uncle Mike. They were the people who lifted me up, who accepted me without judgment. Looking back on my life, I realized something important. I didn't need to seek closure from the people who had wronged me. I had already found it in the love and light I had built around me, and that was more than enough.